All right, guys, so I'm going to take you through how to build from a handoff. Imagine a designer is giving you a Figma file. So how do we build from a Figma file? So we're going to build this particular element or design. So you have to make sure to have your Figma account. Then you could just sign in. If you don't have one, you just create your account. Once you do, it will open up Figma in the web. But if you have it on your machine as well, that's okay. So I'll go over Figma. You can do that later. But the designs we are looking to work on are found in the source page. So source page, go the way, and then we have Stranger Things. So when I click on this, I can see the elements, I can see the text, buttons. I think this is an overlay. It's an overlay. So I'm going to take it one at a time. So let's prepare a coding environment. So first of all, create a folder. Remember, every project needs to have its directory. Once that's created, then you open up your development environment, go to File, you go to Open Folder, locate your folder, or you can just drag it. So this is one way of doing it. So you can just, if you want to skip all of this, you could do it this way, open up, then now you have a folder. Yes, I trust it helps. But if you want to use the simpler way, you could just open up your code editor, and then you just drag the folder into it. Saves you more time. Great. Okay, ignore this for now. So now you're in your editor. So the most important thing is whenever you're building an HTML or a static website or a basic website, your files are really important. The first thing you need would be the index.html. Then you need, always make sure you have your assets grouped quite nicely. Organization is really important. So we call these assets, sorry. And then this includes your CSS. We can call it style.css. You can have your images here as well. So images. Let me put this CSS. Put the style in there. Yeah. So for now, these are the only things we need for now. Then now you come to your HTML. You set up the basic Okay. So then now you set up your HTML, the basic structure of HTML, your doc type, your header, and your body. So you have the basic meta elements added. So I'll just call this movie card. So now we link our style sheet. So link our real style sheet. So we can find this in assets, and then CSS, and then style CSS. Great. So then we save it. Then we are good. So maybe let's test this thing. An H1 tag, we call it movie card. And then now we can go live. So you can run your live server from here, but if you don't have this in VS Code, you can find it here, live server. So I already have it installed, so you can install this here. Once you do that, that will open up, that will give you this feature where you can open up the HTML live. So we have it here. So movie card is all set up. Great. So let's go to the design. So what we see, it updates it. So looking at the design, we see it's rectangular. You can decide to use the dimensions or not, but let's stick with the dimensions. So this, before you build up any design, understand the structure. So don't look at the overall appearance, just understand the structure. So if I want to break this down, this would be a div or a section. Then in it, we would have an h1 tag and probably a p tag. Then over here, we can do this in multiple ways. Some people would use an ordered list, that's a UL with LIs, or you can just go ahead and use a div to handle all of these. Icon, text, then we have the button, then we have an icon, then we have a text. So I have one main div, another one, so another inner one, then init has the h1, the p tag, another div with 3 components in that div. So we'll break that down. So let's start with this. So the dimensions of this we have is here. So this is 414 pixels by 597. 414 pixels by 597. So how do we do that? So first of all, let me just create a section. For most cases, people would use, you could do a main that covers the whole thing, but it really depends on you. And I will do a div. Let's ignore the AI for now. So I'll do a div. I'll call this not a container, but movie card. So I have that as movie card. So in my style, I do a class movie card, and then I add the width. So width here, what was the width again? 414 and then 597. So 414 pixels against height 597. Good. So when we save this, we realize that nothing really happens. It's blank. So just to give us some sort of either a highlight or a background to know whether we have the shape set up. So yeah, so we can do all of these, but we'll go one step at a time. So background color, I'll choose something close to gray, not too white. Okay. So then now we see the card over here. There's that one side, but we'll go through layout as well. So we have that over here. Now I like my cards to have some sort of border radius. So border radius really just means the card doesn't just cut sharply like that. It has a little curve to it. So let's add border radius to it. And then a little value. So this is okay, 10 pixels is fine. Border radius, 10 pixels. So this is the parents card, it's movie card. That's what we have over here. Okay, great. So then now we have our elements with it. So there's a background image, what comes to that later. But let's do the text for now. So you realize that with the main card, you have in it another card, but it's lower to the bottom. That's fine. So we have multiple ways of doing this, right? So we can make this card relative, whereas we add an absolute positioning of these elements to it. So we would have one parent, an absolute layer, and another second absolute layer for this element. So this is what I mean. So in the movie card, we'll need to add another div because that would house all the text. So now the first div would have an H1 called Stranger Things. Then we have a P tag, we'll call it, oh, okay, so it's not a P tag actually, it's a, how do you call it? We can use a list for this. So let's do an ordered list. Then the first, we call it TV shows. Then another, we call it, okay, text two. Maybe let's put drama. And then we put, let's say US. And then maybe, let's just say maybe PG-13. Let's just say. Okay. So we have that. So if we show that on the card, this is how it's looking. Not really great, but structure first, then we go into styling. Okay. So as we have this, Stranger Things, and then all of these, now we also need to add these elements. So this is another div. So that when you're styling, they're also good. So Stranger Things. So after that, then we have a div, which also has 3 sections. So 1, 2, 3. You can use the divs for that as well. So I'll give it a div. Then the first div is an icon. So there are 2 things. You can export this as an asset and then use it in your code. So we'll do that. So I'll call this an image. So I'll give this an image asset. And then an SRC. Then we'll go to assets. Then images. Then let's create an icon folder here. Let's call it icon. So there's nothing there for now. So now let's export this icon. So in Figma, it's quite easy to do this. So you can just select the element, scroll, go to your right, scroll the way to the bottom, click on this add button, and then you can either export it as PNG, as an SVG, whichever. Let's export it as SVG, but you can choose PNG. SVG is usually quite modifiable. So now we export this. I'll call it check. Goes to my downloads, then it up, copy the check, or just move it to images, icon. Yeah, so you can use this image approach, or you can use icons. You can use resources like hero icons. Sorry. Yeah, but in this case, we are designing specifically to look like this. So let's do icon. Now let's do the same for the play button. Export. I'll do it as an SVG. Export. I'll call you play. Same thing. Bring play in here. Then info. Scroll. Export. SVG. Export info. Same thing. Info. So maybe info. Okay. That's cool. So now let's put the elements together. So we are focusing on this. So we have the image and then we have the text. So the image, this is the check.svg. So add an alternative need just for accessibility reasons. And then the text. So I'll call this. I comment here my this. Then we have the play button. So for the play button, it's another div, and it has the image play and then the word play. And then lastly, the info button, it has the info and then the word info. So I think we have all our elements, right? So we save this. Let's come out. Great. So you realize that it doesn't look so great because no style has been applied yet. We'll get there. We'll get there. Let's also export our background image. So we export. Then we export as PNG. We call this BG. BG add. So this is no icon. So we go to our images. BG add. Great. Great. So we have all our assets ready. So now let's make it look better from here. So what we'll do first of all is, again, structure. So you realize that all text and everything is in the center. So let's do that. So I'll just, in this main, I'll just put the class here. And then the text for this should be center. I could either, let's use a style for now. When it gets a lot, then we'll change the class. So the style here will be text, align, center. So then everything now is centered. But there's a lot more we've got to do. So for my movie card, I want to add the background to it. So what do? I go to my style.css and I go to the background image. Then I enter URL. Then I reference my image. So how do you reference the image? So because we are using relative path, we have to look at your file structure. So we are in the CSS folder, and then we are in the assets folder, but the images are in the images folder. So what do we do? So using relative path, use your dot dots. This dot dot in the path in directories really means you are, since you are here, come out. So you're out of this folder now, and you're in assets. So dot dot slash. So as I'm in assets now, where do I go? I go to the images. Then in the images, I go to BG art. So then now BG art.png. No, sorry. So then now we have the image. We have the image. Now, in addition to this, that really helps us. We don't want the images to repeat depending on the screen sizes. When they expand, we want it to maintain or to cover the space or the area whenever the image is applied. So it's always covered and it's always in the center. So that's why we use background size, cover, and then background position center. When we apply this, it still looks the same. But if we were to have increased the size, so let's say width is 550. You realize there's a difference. So the image still stays the same, and then it also covers. So let's take the cover out. You realize that it's repeating. So let's add another. So that's the point of cover. Cover basically says when the space expands more than image size, cover and fill every space without having to experience the style repeat. But to avoid repetition, we also would like to add background, no repeats. No background, sorry, repeats. Sorry, I was using tailwind. That's no repeats. So now you realize that there's no repetition. But we don't like this. So let's cover the image. It covers everything. Great. So let's go back to the dimension of 410. Was it? 414. That's 414. We have our image back. Great. So now let's go to the text. So the text here is Montserrat. That's the font family for the text. So if you go to your right, you see all the settings for the typography. You realize that it's a custom font, Montserrat. You can apply that on it. So let's say class, title. We come back, we add the title class. Then we say font family is Montserrat. But we don't have that. So we'll have to use a custom font. You realize it's still the same. We don't have that. So I'll go over custom fonts after this. So we have the text attribute here on your right side of Figma. You can see the font type that was used, the font weight, the size, and then the spaces. But right now, we're only focusing on the font size, the weight and size. The font name, sorry. So how do we change our fonts? Because our font is not the same. So how do we do that? So we go to our code base, and then we go to our style. So let's add a title class to this. So now let's start with the font. Before that, you realize this is a custom font. Montserrat is not on your machine locally. And also, it doesn't have to be on your machine. It's not on your project currently. So for us to get custom fonts, thankfully, we have services like Google Fonts. So how do we do that? So let's walk through. So Google Fonts Montserrat. We open up Montserrat. Google Font gives us, they have the font style that we need. So how do we integrate this? So this is your first lesson of integration. Always be open-minded to know that you can always integrate any resource you want to your project. So Google Fonts, we get the font. What do I do? So either we get the font. So we either embed it or we download. Let's go with the embedding. So we save ourselves the files. So with the embedding, you select the setup type, which is web, which is what we are doing, using the link approach. So just as you would link your style sheet, it's the same way you would add that font using Google Fonts on your platform. So let's just copy this. Go to our index. Always make sure your style is always the last. So let's paste before. So as we've pasted before, that's one step that's done. So we save it. Does that change anything? No. We still have our font looking the same. So let's continue. So the next step, all we need to do is either we create the font style, or now we have access to it. So all we just need for us is this element. So you can copy all of this actually. So let's first of all update the color. So the color is white. We apply title to you. Now when we see, we have Stranger Things in the color white. So it's still not in the same font because we've not applied the font styles to it. So what do? We go into font family. Font family. And now we can add Montserrat. So the same name that is shown here. So basically, let's just copy this whole thing. Let's copy it. And then we paste it here. So this applies a new style to it. So you realize that these are like, they are telling that you can add a custom weights to it. But we could just use bold, all of that. But we don't need that now. Okay. So to add the font weight, the font weight is black. Black is usually like the highest thickness of it. So that's about 900. If you check black is 900. So we set the font weight to 900, and then so we should achieve a similar look. So we're almost close, but we are close. So now font size is 35. Let's make sure to add that as well. Font size 35 pixels. We save Stranger Things. Great. So now I realize that the text is broken. So how do we do that? We just add the semantic tag BR. So that will just split things to the next line. So we have Stranger Things, like shown here, Stranger Things. Okay. So it is coming to life. So now this section. So we have an unordered list over here, right? The text as well is white. So another thing, so we realize that the text on all of these are white. And then we only applied the white style to just title. But another interesting thing you can do is to apply a style to a parent, and it applies it everywhere. So now we pay attention, everything is black. Now let's add the color here to be white. And then now you realize every other text is white. So that saves you from having to individually make them all white. So now we are done with this. Now let's do this horizontal detail list. So let's call it horizontal detail list. So we get this style, save, apply it to an ordered list class. We paste there. What happens? Nothing happens yet. That's okay. So then let's apply the style. So what do we want to do? We want to make everything lie side by side. We want to have dots after the first and before the last of each element. I want there to be some sort of a gap. So what do? So we apply the style. I like to use flex so you can read on it. So let's just go over what that is. So flex, CSS flex box, that's what they call it. So it's a flexible layout attribute. So it allows you to apply flexible stylings to your properties. So you can lay things out horizontally, vertically, in a grid, overlay, whichever. So you can read on it for more details. I wouldn't go over that. So what do we do? So first of all, I apply the display as flex. So then when we see now all the items are side by side. They are all side by side, but they are all matched up. So let's remove the dots. So the list style, I want it to be none. Let's see, the dots have been removed. Let's go right. Then now I would love to have space between each element. How do we do that? So flex has another attribute called gap. So gap is understandable. What does that mean? It gives gap in between. That's all. So I have the gap in between. But do you want it to? Let's check what's. Okay, it doesn't give us the gap. Group. Auto layout. It doesn't really give us. Okay, it doesn't really give us that. So let's eyeball it. So maybe 10, 15. So we have it all spaced out. Now you realize that it's left aligned. So just as you saw, it's left aligned. Again, flex allows us to easily center our elements or items. How do we do that? So we do justify content, and that's no center, sorry. Justify content center. And now you realize that it moves everything to the middle. So now that the items are horizontally listed, you realize that it's a little skewed towards the right. It's not the space here is not equal to the space here. So these are the things you need to pay attention to. Understanding your spaces and attention to details. So how do we figure this out? So let's inspect and see what's happening. So you realize that when you hover on the UL or the unordered list tag, there's this greenish thing to your left. So you realize that in the computed box, if you check here, we have a padding on the left. So let's get rid of that. So to get rid of all paddings, let's just do padding should be 0. And then now everything is centered beautifully. That's great. That's great. So now we need the dots to appear after each. How do we do this? We have to now use pseudo selectors. So how is that? So we add a hover pseudo. When I do that, I want it to scale a bit. Transform. To scale a bit. So that's that way. Okay, so next. So that's what the pseudo classes do. So now we're going to apply the same thing, but in a more complicated manner. For this, okay, so this I just Googled, so we can easily just get it done. So what this does is it takes the horizontal detail list, which is it takes the horizontal detail list, then it goes to the list tag under the parent, and then it says that if, okay, okay, now to add the dots, you can use this command. So what this really is saying is go to the horizontal details list, which is this. Now go to the list under this, go to all children lists under the main tag or the parents. Now another pseudo class which says not negates is basically a negator, which says that if this list is not a last child, so basically if this list is not last, apply the after selector. So we have the before and the after. So the after basically can add some sort of content to your HTML via CSS. I know this might be a little over, but just to explain a few things. So what this means is that for every child, so long as you are not the last, add another content, something like this, and let that content be a dot. A dot, sorry. So that's what it's doing. So instead of we doing this, which is also another way we can do it, we can just use this. So let's see how that looks. So now that's done. Okay, so we have it showing like this, but they are not supposed to be so far apart, but that's okay. So now do these texts have a particular font? So they do. And then their font is Montserrat medium, size 12. So let's apply that to it. So the font family is the same. Let's just copy this. We paste it there. The font size and width, we paste it there as well. Now font size is 12. And then font width is medium. What is the size for medium? Let's go back to our Google fonts. Let's go to medium. So medium is 500. So we set the font width medium to 500. Let's check our cards. And then we have it similar to this. But I realize that the space between this is quite close. So we have to just reduce our gap a little bit. So let's say 10. Let's reduce it a little bit more. Let's say 5. Okay, let's say 2. Let's just take it out. Okay, great. So now that we've taken it out, realize that it's the after content is applying margin left to it. So let's use that instead of the cap. So instead of using margin left, you can just use margin top bottom 0 and then left right 15. So we can have this set up. So if you have any questions, you can also let me know. Let's reduce it a bit more. Let's make it 5. Okay, so now we have something similar to this. Similar. Great. So now that covers the horizontal bit. So then now our next section is this. So we have the icons and then the play buttons. So the same light. So let's give it a class. Let's call this okay, button container. No, let's not use button container. Let's use movie actions. So movie actions. So same thing. So I would still use the display flex. And then I will still use content, justified content as space between. So what does this do? This basically puts the elements into a horizontal position, and then justify space between just says, I am splitting you guys. The space between you, I'm spacing you out. So that's what we have over here. So it's basically just spacing it out. But then we don't want the space to be all the far apart. So let's take justify content out. And now let's just use gap. So we use gap as 10 pixels. It's too small. So let's use, say, 20 pixels. Okay, might be a little too small. So let's use maybe 100. Let's look at 100. Might be too much. So let's maintain 50. And then now, instead of the space between, justify content will now be center. So we can have all the elements in the middle. So far, so good. So far, so good. Now you realize that the space between these two is quite a lot compared to this, which is not so much far apart. So let's inspect. How do you resolve this? So if we inspect, you realize that the P tag has some form of margin, the margin at the top and the bottom. So let's get rid of that. How do we do that? So we have this parent class. So how do we access the P tag? Simply calling the parent tag and then calling the P tag. So this would go deep into the tree and then call the P tags. So what are we trying to do? For this, again, we are taking out all margins. So margin is 0. And I'm sure the font is also Montserrat. And then there's also the bar. So you realize that it's now similar to this. But there's some gap. There's some gap at the top. Okay. So we have that over the font size. So let's see, the font size for this is 12 Montserrat. It's also medium. Same for this. Yeah, so we maintain it. Okay. We maintain it. That's cool. Let's go. Okay. So the next immediate thing is this button that we can implement. So how do we do that? So it's quite clear. We can see that it's surrounded in a div. And then we have the icon and then we have the play. So how do we do that? So the same. So you can play around with flex as creatively as you can. So I'll give this a class, call it, it could be an ID, but let's use this a class right now. No, sorry. Class, call you play button. So play button. Good. So now you would see that we have the background of the play button being white. So let's do that first. So background color is white. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now it's white. Now our text should alternate for contrast sake. So color of the text should be what? Black. So we have the play button there. So now we want all to be horizontally aligned, both the icon and the color. So what do? We go to our favorites, display, flex. So now it has changed the size a bit because now the image is trying to occupy the available space. So let's resolve this. So first of all, let's come back to our style or our design. Realize that the container's width is 101 and its height is 38. So let's do that. So width is 101 pixels and then the height is 38. So you should see there's some sort of difference here. Okay. So now I want these to be in the middle. So what do? So with our display flex, we have something called the same justify content to center. So this would horizontally center the elements, but now we want it vertically centered. So what do? So we have something called align items. So these are all attributes combined to flex. So now we have the items vertically centered. But now I want there to be some space between a button and play. What do? Our usual gap. Save 10 pixels. So there we go. So now the play font size is quite bigger than the rest. So let's check what it is. So it's Montserrat semi-bold 15. So we add the font size being 15. And then the font weight being, let's double check. So semi-bold, Montserrat, semi-bold. So semi-bold is 600. So 600. Okay, that's great. So we are applying, you realize that we are trying to apply the style to it, but it's not taking effect. Why? The reason is we have a parent that has styled every P element directly to have this font size or font features. And then we come again to do that with the play button over here. But in this case, we are not even targeting the P tag. So the changes would be overrun by its parent. So what do? We take the style out from here and be direct on the P tag. So then we should see a change on it now. So it's looking good so far. So then realize that it's quite sharp on the edges, whereas here we have rounded edges. So if you look at the border radius of this rectangle, you realize it's 5 over here. So you double click on that. So let's apply that on it. So border radius should be 5 pixels. And then let's see. Great. Very similar to our design. Great. So that's it so far. So now the main question that we're going to face, which is obvious, is how do we get all of this that we've done all the way down here? How do we do that? So there are two ways of doing this, or more. There are multiple ways, really. Multiple, not just two. Sorry, multiple ways of doing this. But one of the interesting ways of doing this simply is by playing with the displays using absolute and relative, a combination of absolute and relative style keys. So let's do that. We can use that as well. We can use the display flex as well, and even grid. So there are multiple ways, transform, several ways of doing this. But let's use the absolute positioning in combination with the relative positioning. So what do we do? So first of all, our movie card should have the position as relative. So you can read more. So everything stays the same. You realize that once we use the relative in combination with the absolute, all content would stay within the confines of the relative parent positioning. So what do we do next? So now that we have movie card as relative, so now we can add the display here as absolute. So now we have multiple styles here. So let's just take this out. Let's add another class. Let's call this inner card. Let's just do inner card. So inner card. Let's paste the styles that we had over there here. Great. So now you realize that still everything looks the same. And that's a good thing. Everything looks the same. So now let's start playing with things. So if I change this and I make the bottom 0, so sorry. So position relative, sorry, this has to be position absolute. So you realize automatically it just falls all the way to the So I made a mistake. It's supposed to be position absolute, not display. So you realize that things are kind of like skewed, but that's fine. That's because if you inspect, you realize that now the div is wrapping its content. So for this to remain or get back to its position, we just have to add a width. Whenever you apply absolute, you are bound to face something like this. So what do? We add a width, and we say the width should be 100% of its parent, and we should have everything back to normal. But then now, question again is, how do we get it down here? Well, that's quite easy. With position absolute, and you should read more about it. So CSS absolute position. You can read more about it in the CSS layout on here. So when you have the time, you can read more about it. This is just to go through on what's possible. So with a position absolute, you have access to styles like left, right, top, bottom, etc. So with these controls, what we can do is, I would want my bottom to be 0. I've not saved it. That would mean bottom space or position is now 0. So all of these should move down to 0. So now let's save. Now we have everything down at 0. But then you realize that the design it's not touching the base. So we need to that's about 57, or let's just say 60. So come down by 60 pixels. Let's save it. There we go. So we have a similar design to what we have here. Very similar. But we are not done. There's one more thing in here, you realize that there's a shadow overlay. No. In here, you realize that there's some sort of gradient background overlay. This is gradient. So because you're using layers, an absolute layer, we want to apply it on top of it. So similar to what we did, we create, again, make sure that you are in your movie card, in the relative part. So now we'll just create another div. And then I'll hold this. So the easiest way is to, one, export this as PNG and then use that. But it would ideally, it's okay, but production wise and resource wise, it will just make your app quite heavy. Thankfully, we have CSS that can do that for us. Now, ChatGPT just generates that for us. I usually don't have this memorized, so you can easily do some of these. So we can get let's use this smoother version gradual feed. Let's try this. So let's call this overlay. Let's call this overlay. So for overlay, there are multiple ways of doing this, but this is just one. So overlay, we add the gradient. Position is absolute as well. Width is 100%. Height should also be 100%. And then it should be tagged. So we are having it being white because our opacity is 1, but let's make our opacity 0. And there we go. There we go. So now here's the thing. So question will be, why is it covering it? We want these layers rather to be on top. So that's the beautiful thing about absolute position. If you look at it like a vector plane in the z-axis. So what you can do is, for the inner card, we can do a z index of 10 or 5 or 1. It should just be a number greater than the default. So then you realize now that you have it coming on top and then the gradient is going below. So that's what it is. It's not really similar, but we can tweak what we have. The gradient at the base is looking too dark, so we can reduce the opacity a bit. Let's go by half. Great. So now we have something similar. Let's just maybe a 7.5. Let's just go with a 6. Great. So that's it really. So one last thing, you realize that now it's kind of like overflowing from the main card. So another thing that we can add to this is an overflow. So here we'll say whatever overflows from the parent card, hide it. So then everything takes the form of the final card. So that's what we have right here. You can decide to add shadows if you want, but that's what we have over here. So let's just center the whole thing. So again, it's quite easy to do. In the main, let's get the width. The width should be the 100 view width. So that's the total screen. And then the height 100, display flex, center horizontally, not center vertically, and you should have the element in the middle. So that's really it. So yeah, you can do really interesting things, you know. So now you can advance this, add animations, whatever, when you hover, background image should change, all that stuff you can do. But this is just the base of building out, following a handoff design by a designer. Yes. So if you have any questions, any feedback, you can hit me up, then we are good to go. Enjoy.